Okay, welcome back to Desert Harvest. And I'm with my partner in crime, Orin Molivinsky. Orin, it's good to see you.
Hey Pete, good to see you too.
Do you have anything good to eat over the long weekend?
Oh yeah, we had a big barbecue and I was able to get over to the meat shop in Phoenix,
Oh,
pick up
nice.
some I did ribs because my son Brady, as you know, is headed off to the army next week.
Excellent.
So he wanted ribs, so we smoked some ribs and that worked out really well. Uh and I did get some local birds from him too, some chickens, meat birds.
Sweet.
And so yeah, it was a good 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 ending to his childhood.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. Well, as they say, an army travels on its stomach. So, I mean, you got
Yes.
him, you sent him off to the service. Well, one of my favorite things about you, Orin, is like you're not somebody who just talks about things. Like you go and you get things done. You're a doer in the world, and um, I've always found that just a really attractive quality of you. And we have a guest that I think is cut from that cloth. He's somebody who's
Mhm.
trying to do things in the world, not just talk about them. And often, as you and I know, try and do big things in the world. It's hard. If it was easy, anybody would be doing things. And sometimes the biggest challenges, most important challenges, are they're hard to figure out and they take a lot of effort. I'm going to read you his mission statement as
Yeah.
part of his business, and then we'll introduce him. But his mission statement is as follows: like, as an intermediary between small scale farms and wholesale markets, Pivot Produce provides access to healthy foods and helps rebuild regional agriculture economies in order to foster community care. Think of Pivot Produce as the antidote to massive corporate food distributors. Farmers get a fair price for their wares, and restaurants get to use the best of what Southern Arizona farms have to offer. Its distribution on a local level, fostering a supportive and engaged food scene each step of the way. So we're lucky today, Orin. We have the founder of Pivot Produce, Mr. EriK Stanford. So, EriK, thank you for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is my first podcast appearance.
Okay,
Oh,
excellent.
nice.
Well, that matches with you're the first uh, podcast guest for
Oh,
Desert Harvest. So
figured out together.
we'll figure it out together. So if I stumble along, please be patient. Um, so, EriK, I love your mission statement. And in terms of building markets for the farmers that we think deserve to be um, much bigger than they currently are. I mean, somebody's got to be the connector between them. So I'd like for you to maybe talk a little bit about what problem you're trying to solve for your customers. How would you describe that?
I think there's a problem that we tried to solve when we started, and that maybe that has flipped a little bit. So I'll start with where we started off because I was a restaurant chef, worked in kitchens all over the country for a decade or so. Um, and then I was working at a small little cafe in Tucson called Five Points Market and Kitchen. Um, really great food. Their focus was to, utilize local organic product produce and meat and eggs and dairy as much as we possibly could. But, you know, we were one of those restaurants that was doing it as much as we possibly could in air quotes that you see. And I really, as once I became the chef of that organization, um, really tried to take that seriously. And so the original intention was restaurants should have higher quality food available to them in their kitchens. And I was going to farmers markets on a personal level, and the product that I would get there was a lot different than the product
Yeah.
we were getting off the back of the Cisco truck, or even an organic distributor like Alberts or whatever. And the quality was vastly different. So that was the original intention. I think a few years into the project, it became clear to me that my interest was changing in that, I realized that it wasn't restaurants that really needed help. It was these growers, these producers that were trying to do an amazing thing of growing super healthy food in a desert and supply a community with that food. So really the intention at some point slowly switched to where the restaurants almost became more of a means to an end, and the end being a more sustainable and logical kind of regional food system, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, so this distribution problem, you have somebody who needs stuff and somebody who's making stuff. And it would seem to me that as many chefs might like to have access to the produce that you have. So, was at the time that you began this, were you on your own and doing it in a community where there wasn't anybody doing what you were doing? So was it novel, or were you one of several that were doing it back then?
Well, I mean, we were the first folks that I was aware of in Tucson focusing on restaurant distribution. We're fortunate to be partnered with the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, who was trying to solve a similar wholesale issue, but for working more in institutional markets.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point because it's a big part of what we do now. So there were a few folks trying to figure out, hey, these growers can't just survive off of farmers markets. And in fact, farmers markets are really difficult for a grower to do more than one or two a week. They'll be able to spend enough time on your farm to produce that food. So we were fairly novel, I guess, in that we were the first to kind of tackle the direct to restaurant stuff.
So, Eric, I have a quick question. Yeah, my background, as you know, is in the restaurant industry, and much like you, I worked in restaurants in different parts of the country. I wasn't a chef, but more on the operator side, front of the house, and so. But one of the biggest challenges that Pete and I have talked about when I first started getting involved in a similar process out on the East Coast where I was running restaurants is that chefs and buyers, in a sense, at restaurants compare you that the comparison
Yeah.
point is to Cisco, US Food Service, whoever they're buying, even if they're buying, like you said, from a niche distributor who's doing high quality foods. What are some of the some of the pushback that you still deal with, that you dealt with early on from restaurant buyers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much education that we have to do and when we start working with a new chef.
Mhm.
Some people come in, they've done it, they understand why locally grown is important, and we don't have to go through the whole thing. But for the most part, you have to first get comfortable with me saying no. No, tomatoes aren't available in the winter. No, we won't have lettuce year round. No, just constantly, no, your peaches didn't come in this week. Um,
Right.
uh, and that's really crazy for a chef who's used to every distributor always saying, yes, we can have you avocados from the other side of the planet. I have your doorstep tomorrow. And that's what we as chefs were kind of brought up in, that, if we have the money, we can get it. And that's just not the case with some of this kind of regional agriculture. So we're constantly butting our head up against that one. And then, there's also the availability thing, educating chefs around what seasonality in Arizona looks like. We have, chefs that are even totally down with local sourcing. They've been doing it in Maine for the last 10 years, and now they got a job at a resort in the foothills of Tucson. The seasonality is so different.
Yeah.
And the expectations of when that product and how much that product costs are going to be way different than what you were experiencing up there too. So there's so much chef education that we have to do, and we are pretty picky about what customers we take on based on that. I don't serve every restaurant that approaches us to buy stuff. You need to be kind of down with the mission to an extent.
Mm-hmm. That's
Well,
great.
that could be perceived. I think on the surface, that's perceived as like a negative, right? Like, well, after I give up having avocados from New Zealand or whatever, wherever they come. But what you're really offering is a different road that yields something better. So in this education process, do you find that people follow the train of thought, the education pretty easily, or did they go, listen, my consumer expects avocado every day of the year,
Yeah.
and if I don't take care of that consumer expectations, I'm going to lose business. So there's probably some people who say the customer's expectations are immutable; they'll never change, and so consequently, I have to do things the way I've always done things. And then there's this other more creative point of view that says, well, we can create a delicious palate for you if you follow, the vagaries of a local thing. Could you kind of talk about what does it mean to get into those conversations, and are they super hard, or is it only the people that have a predisposition to wanting to do this that end up being the people you work with?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we've, like converted is a bad word, but we brought along folks that were like very much Cisco chefs, and that have come along to participate in Pivot on a weekly basis. I think there's, generally we start slow with a new customer. I've, not every restaurant is like a Nello or Bata here in Tucson who source almost all of their produce through Pivot or direct from farms. There's a lot of folks that are just trying to supplement
Right.
their regular menu stuff, and like maybe we're just doing specials or the soups you're serving or like a certain salad on your menu. We're not taking over your whole menu. Uh, because having a completely seasonal menu, is not necessarily viable for a like super fast casual restaurant or something. I mean,
Right.
so we participate at different levels. We try to figure out with the chef where's the most logical place for us to fit in, because sometimes local produce isn't super consistent, and if you need that consistency, I'll tell you, yes, I can get you spinach for 10 months out of the year. I guarantee that's going to be consistent. Thank you, Blue Sky Organics. You guys are the best. But, if you want tomatoes, I'm going to tell you that you're going to have the best tomatoes possible for 2 months out of the year. And then I'll talk to you again in May.
Yeah.
So it's just meeting people where they're at, I think, is the most important part. And just being super honest. I never overpromise on local produce.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot of educating, obviously, but then in a sense, you're consulting in a way. It's almost like you're consulting on behalf of the farms that you're representing, so to speak. So, y- what's that? I mean, it's not a traditional sales process, so how do you find the time? And how have you evolved with your model to allow yourself to still provide that education to the chef and to the buyer while also being able to run your business?
Yeah, that's a tough part. I mean, right now we're pretty dialed in with the 15 restaurants that we serve every single week. And then there's another 5 to 6 that pop in every once in a while. So honestly, we haven't had to go through that process in a little while.
Okay.
We just converted to an online store, which is amazing for the chefs to be able to see the product,
Yeah. Right.
see the prices, build an invoice. That's great, but it's certainly we're noticing that feedback loop is closing a little bit. Where I used to have direct email communications
Yeah.
or a lot of direct text communications with these chefs. So we're trying to solve that problem still. I want to make sure we're able to, let someone know when, oh my God, 10 pounds of the like coolest purple basil just showed up. I know you're going to love it, but it didn't make it on the online store. Trying to manage all that stuff right now.
Sure.
But a lot of my time is, we've established our customers so well, they're spending X amount of dollars every single week, and we don't have to kind of educate every week right now. And
That's great.
Could you describe the economic impact to the grower? I mean, prior to you being present, if you can only make a single farmer's market or two farmers market, I mean, it seems to me that this is a lifeline to a segment of agriculture that without a pivot produce in the life of the similar farms that you work with, um, what does it mean for them to work with you compared to when they didn't work with you?
yeah, I mean, when we started out with 4 farms, and everybody was like really an acre or less. This is almost micro agriculture. And what we originally asked for was we want we can pay 80% of retail, your like farmer's market price, right? We can pay 80% of that, and we're basically just marking it right back up to farmer's market price to sell wholesale. So they're getting 80% of the dollar, end consumer's dollar. I think when you look at that on like a national agriculture scale, maybe one of y'all has the exact figure, but I know that it's less than 15%.
Yeah, right.
The producer actually receives of that dollar. So that right there, I think is absolutely huge. Also selling at a farmer's market takes a lot of extra labor as far as packaging, bundling, bunching, putting in different little containers, all that different stuff that as a person who's grocery shopping, rarely do I want to buy 3 cases of peaches or, like a 20-pound crate of peaches.
Sure.
And I'm doing some canning or something. I want to buy a little perfectly made container of peaches sitting out at the farmer's market. For us, we want to buy 200 pounds at a time, plus whatever. So that the labor of individualized packaging then goes away for the grower. And then it becomes, it's kind of our responsibility, depending on the market stream we're sending it out to make sure it's packaged correctly. I think so that's been super beneficial for folks. And then getting that time back of not going to the farmer's market has been huge. We have some growers, just like the restaurants are super varied as far as how much they participate and source from us. The producers are super varied as well. We have a couple farms that probably 95% of what they produce comes to Pivot. And then we have several folks where we're maybe 10% of what they sell. It's just depending on the product they have or how long of a relationship we've had, all those stuff kind of ebbs and flows.
Well,
So
that's
do
like
you find?
oh,
Sorry.
no,
Go
no,
ahead.
no, no.
Pete.
Well, I
do-
did. Go ahead, Orin. Sorry.
So, do you find yourself if one of your regular restaurant customers is asking for something specific, do you find yourself going out to look for it for them? Is that part of what you're doing?
We certainly have done that, or we say, I think what the most interesting version of that is you want to put something on your menu 6 months from now. That's when we need to be having the conversation, right? So let me find the right grower to make sure that you have mustard greens available 20 pounds a week during your busiest season for the period of this menu. And then let's make an agreement, whether it's a handshake or an actual contract, with the grower to say, we've got guaranteed demand for this product. And, that will ebb and flow a little bit when it comes to season. It's never going to start exactly on the date that we said it was going to start. But relationships like that are the most interesting, I think, because we have actual commitments on both sides, well, 3 sides really, to products, and we can guarantee income for these growers, 6 months from now. As far as new products, that's a little bit more difficult. I generally don't like to ask the producers to grow anything specifically. I'm more interested in asking the grower, what do you like to grow? What are you good at growing? What does, your land produce in the most highest quality level? And let's work with that and try to find a market for that. And sometimes there isn't a market, but that's, I think, a more interesting way for us to approach it. Because if you're not interested in growing something, just like when you're a cook, if you're not interested in cooking it, you're not going to put in, nearly enough compassion to make it the ideal product.
Mm-hmm.
So a 4 or 5x return compared to like a conventional experience where, you go from 15% to 80% in terms of what you keep. What do you have, like, people just knocking down your door that they want to work with you, or are people skeptical? Because it would seem to me that you're the best deal in town for a grower, and I'm curious, from a scale perspective, because I'd like at some point for you to talk a little bit about, are there limits to the business that you have that are natural to the nature of the service, and that you would need an entirely competing business doing it in a similar way, or is your business scalable? But the first question is, given that it's so different, the economics is so different than the grower, do you have to limit the number of people you work with and everybody wants to work with you, or are you having to convince growers in the same way you're having to convince chefs?
Yeah, at the beginning there was a lot of trust gaining needed. I think there had been there's endless organizations and nonprofits that are trying to come up with solutions for small scale growers, to varying levels of success. And, a lot of these growers had been parts of projects with universities and studies and research, and, maybe didn't see actual dollars coming out of that. And as far as sales. So, when I showed up, I had some history of working with some growers, but there's a lot of folks that had met, and I'm first approaching, and I'm just a, white kid from Wisconsin. I've lived in 6 years, maybe at that point, I was, it took a lot of convincing, I think. I would say the growers we work with now are fully convinced, fully bought in. But that took, with some people in particular, 5 or 6 years of like consistent sales. We write a check as soon as they deliver the product.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it as easy for growers as possible. So that's taken a long time. We do have new growers approaching us quite often. And it's been an interesting project to try to figure out, where can we fit in a new producer. I've got, Westover Farm, she grows 200 pounds of different types of hardy greens for us a week. I don't have more of a market. Like,
Right.
if you're a new grower and you're telling me that you like to grow kale and chard and mustard greens, right now I don't have a market for you. So
Wow.
there is a little bit of like, is there anything else you want to grow? Because
Yeah.
for the wholesale market that I'm currently serving, not that we're not always looking for new markets, but we're full up on that product. So there's some of that stuff as far as negotiating new relationships, but I think our name is pretty well known, and we have folks approaching us all the time to work with us.
Yeah, it's interesting, in working with farmers over the years, I've noticed that farmers who are somewhat new to a crop, even if let's say, that someone inherited their parents' ranch and that, they're just doing cattle and they convert, 10 acres to gardening or produce or whatever. What I've seen a lot of is they'll plant before they have a customer. And so some of the wisest advice I've ever heard from Department of Ag people is, have your market before you plant. It's okay to test plant, but do you run into that a lot? I guess you do, because you just mentioned that story, but we're like, why did you plant 4 acres of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a guy from Cochise County call last year and was like, I've got 1 million pounds of pomegranate. Do you know what I can do with it? I have no idea. First of all, like, we're not the right person to talk to about 1 million pounds of fruit. But also, like, how did you think about this first?
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of your job is educating not only the chef, but the grower. I mean, as far as educating the grower, it sounds like on what restaurants are looking for in Tucson.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That level of nimbleness, it seems like everybody's got to be ready to turn on a dime. I mean, I think you guys have some experience about, like, well, if something unexpected that happens, you got to reorient your business plan. You've had times when you've been successful about what looks like could be a disaster could actually turn out to be something good. You guys want to tell that story?
Yeah, EriK, you'll tell it a lot better than me, but if you could, that peach, the microburst in the peach orchard story, which you told me in 2018, and I think I've retold that story in some way, shape, or form 150 times since.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're hopefully in the middle of it now, but it's, monsoon season for people in Arizona is where we get the majority of our annual rainfall. And this particular monsoon season, I think in 2018, brought some pretty intense storms to Cochise County. And at the time we were working with this orchard, um, I produced these incredible peaches. They do the Saturn peaches, but they also had the like just these really lovely huge peaches. Um, and we were going out there to pick up early one morning. I think it was like sunrise when I got to the farm, and I pulled up, and there's the washes were running along the farm. So obviously there had been some crazy storm through the night or the day before, but there was just water running. And as I got closer and closer to the farm, I saw that there was peaches bobbing up and down in the stream, running away from the farm. And then, when I pulled into the farm and the whole family was out there just like checking and just realizing that their entire peach crop had been pretty much decimated. So, what was still on the trees was pockmarked with these, hail damage where it had been, hit by hail. So what wasn't on the ground, we were able to harvest and made a phone call to Arizona Wilderness, the, brewery in Gilbert. They have a restaurant. I think they have a place in downtown Phoenix now as well, but time was just their Gilbert spot. We had worked with the brewers over there on some other projects, and I said, hey, we got, whatever it was, I don't remember now, 2,000 pounds of these peaches, and they need to be processed tomorrow because this hail damage is gonna, kill them. Can I come deliver them? And they said absolutely. And a few hours later, I had left Cochise County. I was in Phoenix with 2,000 pounds of peaches unloading at the brewery. And I think, eventually I was able to bring some peach beer to the farmers. I doubt it was, it didn't save their year, but hopefully it's a little bit better.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's such a cool story. And, it's wonderful that you mentioned that you already had the relationship and, you know, so to have somebody like you in the community that's there in a sense as that connector between, producer and restaurateur chef is invaluable. I mean, to me, Pete and I both really appreciate what you do probably more than most just because we understand it. We've lived it and we understand what you have to basically go through to have your business even succeed, right? And on the other hand, you're dealing with all these other challenges. So that's awesome. And do you feel like Pete had talked about scalability of your business. Is it still pretty much wrapped around your ability to make those connections, or do you feel like you're able to have enough cash flow, enough to be able to have a team? What's that look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, there's three of us full time, and some three folks part time, that make it all happen. Which 8 years ago when I started at this, it was just me, and for the first 4 years, it was just me and maybe one other person for 10 hours a week. So it has ballooned a lot since COVID, and it's man, nothing makes me more proud than having like a team behind the name rather than just myself. And if it was continued to be just myself, it probably wouldn't exist anymore because the weight of running a business, as you all know, is extremely heavy. So yes, we've been growing and we've been scaling. We've kind of plateaued in the last few years, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think we're filling the market niche for our region really well. I think where we're going to see growth in the future is hopefully Pivot's not the organization even in Tucson, but I think scaling for me in a way that makes sense is there should be many more organizations like Pivot, and there are several in the state of Arizona, and we're just now kind of starting to connect with each other. We have a great relationship with Sun Produce in Phoenix, and through them, we work with growers in the Verde Valley, and now we're reaching up to Kingman. Obviously, we have relationships with folks in Cochise County, so we can have eggs harvested in the Valley of the Dragoon Mountains, and the next day potentially they could be on the shelf at a store in Lake Havasu City. That's I think where we're going to see scaling up. I don't necessarily need the market in Tucson to grow. I'd love it if it does, but like we've talked about earlier, it's a lot of work. So how do we connect with other markets throughout the state through this network of different food hubs, whatever you want to call them, and benefit each other? Because what's so awesome about Arizona is there are so many different climates and growing
Yeah.
regions producing different types of food at different types of year. And the more we connect, the more we're serving the whole state. And it's been a really fun project. And that's where our growth is focused.
What,
Yeah,
let me
go
just,
ahead,
let me,
Pete. Yeah.
because I'm really curious, like, what was the impact of Pivot Direct, where you had a direct to consumer on, was that a net positive, or did that turn out to not have, did that squeeze margins even further? Like, what is part of your scalability bringing things directly to the eater, so to speak?
It has become that. And that came out of COVID. Like a lot of businesses, we had to shift, we had to pivot. We were exclusively focused on restaurants, and we're doing some school district deliveries as
Oh,
well.
nice.
When COVID came, and all of those closed, with the exception of our account at a hospital. Everybody else was not open for months at a time. At that time we had started experimenting with this forward contracting. So we have growers in the region have crops in the ground that we had promised we would purchase and deliver, wherever we were going to deliver.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really interested in letting those folks down. So, what came out of that was to say, we've got folks in their houses, that a lot of them immune compromised, can't leave their house. They need food. Let's launch this service. It's not a unique idea. Obviously, there's lots of folks delivering groceries at the time, but ours was focused like a CSA to your house, basically. Well, we launched the project. We called it Pivot Direct. We launched it like 2 weeks after lockdown, and we had 350 households sign up overnight.
Wow.
So then we had to scramble to figure out how do you deliver to 350 homes in and around Tucson, kind of week to week, but it saved the business. And we continue to do that project to this day. It's more a reasonable number of about, in the summer, it's around, I think we got 150 weekly CSA customers. There's so many cool things about that project we can talk about, but what it's done is now our business is not just wholesale, it's wholesale and direct to consumer. But for the farmer, for you selling
Yeah,
vegetables
right.
to me, Orin, that it's still wholesale, right? I'm just buying more. And then the market I serve is split up, right? So the grower doesn't have any more work other than hopefully just producing more vegetables that we're going to purchase. So we've maintained, while it is direct to consumer, it's still, I consider it wholesale because we're doing it on a pretty large scale.
That's a great story. That's really cool what you've been able to do there. And I think, Pete knows a lot about a lot of the home delivery services, but it sounds like a lot of those were born in the same way out of necessity. And when you're used to doing wholesale, it's hard to shift to direct to
Yeah.
consumer, but it's great that you've been able to pull that off. That's awesome.
350 is a big number. I mean, that means that you had a lot of people aware of what you were doing. You're able to convert. I mean, even with the need that COVID drove, that's still an incredible success. And I mean, from a business, obviously predictable revenue, just like the farmers need predictable revenue. If you can have predictable revenue, it's easier to manage what you have going on. I mean, you'll have seasonality of customers, obviously, but you also have seasonality of food. So if you have less customers in the summer, you probably have less food to sell, and maybe that's a good, mix. If you were to pick where your business would grow more dramatically, let's say you developed as intricate a network as you wanted to across the state to bring the food to the people, is the business better served by more restaurants connecting with you or more individuals?
At this point, I couldn't imagine the business existing without either. I think
Okay.
when you think about a farm business, selling a certain amount wholesale to pivot makes a lot of sense, but you also want to get the highest price for your product. So also doing one farmer's market on the weekend, the big busy one downtown or whatever it is, that makes a lot of sense. And then maybe managing your own CSA in, with 30 of your neighbors, that makes a lot of sense. So you build your business, establishing 3 or so different markets. Pivot's the exact same. I can't imagine them existing apart anymore. We are purchasing products in advance for restaurants. So I'm purchasing from the producer in anticipation of orders
Right.
because it's such a quick turnaround, with wanting to get them the highest quality product. I don't want it sitting on my shelf while orders come in.
Right.
I want to, so there's a certain amount of, oops, I ordered too much arugula, or, whatever it is. Every single week that happens. And having the direct to consumer side paired with it, I'm able to say, hey, that arugula is going to go bad this week, but maybe the butternut squash that we were going to put in the bag isn't. Let's switch that out right now for the first 80 customers of the CSA. It gets very intricate, but we can use up that product that needs to turn,
Right.
hold on some other products. So they benefit people. They benefit each other so much.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine this type of business working without having both.
So that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that Pete and I have talked about a lot is, uh, one of the biggest obstacles or greatest obstacles for this type of ecosystem to work, the community agriculture and restaurants supporting farms, et cetera, is logistics and storage. And in a sense, the large distribution companies have solved for the logistics issue. Um, so if, as we kind of bring our discussion towards a close, what are some of the biggest challenges you see moving forward? What are some of your biggest pain points as a business owner operator? What should we be relaying to the business community who would be buying from you as to how to help you keep your business more efficient and productive so that you can continue to operate in the way you are?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question. I mean, logistics is what we do. We're in the business of moving food from one place to another, and that in Arizona requires refrigeration, cooling units, and they break down constantly. I'm a walk-in repair guy, like he's on my speed dial. So that the like infrastructure of it on a small scale, the cost of managing the infrastructure is so high, which I imagine if it was to scale up or for the larger guys, hopefully those costs aren't nearly as like detrimental to the business. We are a grant funded business, and I'm not sure that we will ever get away from that. A lot of the work that we do is giving food away for free. So we're able to, acquire grants for certain projects that, without, we're not a profitable business. Or we at least we haven't figured that part out yet. So that's the nature of what we're doing. I don't know that there's an example in the country that I can point to, of folks that are wildly successful financially in doing this. Depends on how you measure success. I measure success as getting food to people in Arizona, and we're wildly successful. But if you're my accountant and looking at my P&L, we're not that successful. So I think there's different ways to measure success, and being completely transparent about that, is I think a really important part of getting this whole system to grow and to get more people on board. I think that for a long time there was we had restaurants under the impression that we were like jacking our prices way up because our food is expensive. We're the most expensive option in the market, because we were making a lot of money off it. And that wasn't the case. The case is we don't set prices, the farmers do. So we mark up based on what the farmers tell us, not what we, some arbitrary margin that we need to make. So I don't know. There was a lot to that question, and my answer might be
Yeah,
a little.
your answer is great. And it's really, Pete and I put this together, and our mission as a team is to really help to solve for that, the sustainability not only of agriculture, but of the type of business that you're running. How do we make that, because your heart's in the right place, you're doing incredible things for the entire community. And how do we as a community put our brains together to make it financially viable, right? Where we know, there's one thing about becoming wealthy doing something, there's another thing about just being able to make ends meet. And
Right.
there's probably a happy medium in between, where somebody like you who's, busted your ass doing this and taken so many risks, you deserve to be able to to reap some, financial stability out of it. And so that's our mission, is to help bring the business community together, the agricultural community, and maybe even bring resources from government, like you've done, grants like you've done, but really to be a connector, so that there isn't somebody like you carrying the whole burden on their own shoulders, that it really is all of us working as a team to try to make uh, this all work and more viable. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, and I appreciate the transparency, Eric. I mean, I think when Orin and I talk about what we'd like to see in on our kids' plates, on our neighbors' plates, on restaurants' plates, and whatnot, we we understand that in order for those things to happen, the all the things that back up behind it, the grower's life, the distributor's life, the chef's life, I mean, everything has to make economic sense for the type of change that we think would needs to happen. So, describing to us what you just described to us, which includes philanthropy, if you're giving away food, obviously, I mean, that's a interesting overlay. And Orin has, in previous episodes, talked about some of the work he did in Washington, D.C., where somehow or other that seemed to fit there as well, in that, because food is unpredictable and it's different, food is available at different times at different quantities, rather than have any waste, there was a place to kind of, to make sure that food was, had a home that was helping people.
And Eric, you did mention before earlier in the conversation, about, I think, did you say you were working with, is it a food kitchen of, like an organization locally that's helping you move some of the product?
Yeah, well, we have an amazing partnership with the community food bank, which isn't just selling them vegetables for them to distribute, but they really hold an administrative role within the food system down here. They gather farmers, they coordinate sales to institutions. So we're delivering to Tucson Unified School District, the largest school district in Southern Arizona. They're one of our biggest customers. University of Arizona, Tucson Medical Center, all of those relationships came through the community food bank and were developed by them. And like I said, they were trying to solve the same problem. But for us, also, we realized that high quality food, like you said, Orin or Peter, like everybody needs to get paid along this
Yeah.
line. That doesn't mean that high quality food should only be accessible to folks that can afford it.
Right.
We've built into, with the exception of our restaurant model, at all of the direct to consumer stuff, we've built in ways for folks to receive food for free. So I think 25% of our direct to consumer base is either no costs. It's a sliding scale, right?
Right.
So 25% are paying what they can with the service every week. We have some folks that have been receiving bags of vegetables every week for 4 years and have never paid for it. Along with that, we have programs that we partner with. Right now, we have one with the Pasquayaki Nation. They've got a big NIH grant to study the health benefits of food access, right? So we're just the partner who can bring that healthy food to them.
Yeah.
That gets distributed for free. We deliver to senior centers. So part of our work is not only navigating sales directly to consumers, but writing grants in partnership with community partners to just distribute basically a CSA bag, but do it for free depending on the community. So that's another way that we kind of get food out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Eric, listen, thanks for spending time with us, and maybe you'll come back and talk with us some more. I mean, we're really grateful for all the good work you're doing and interested in. We want to let people know about what you got going on, and then over time, maybe this podcast would be a way that we can help connect you to the right folks to have you make your goals happen, and your goals benefit not just you but all of us, because the more healthy people around us, less money's being spent on disease, the less people are suffering. I mean, it's an endless virtuous cycle as opposed to, this vicious cycle that we have going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I appreciate that.
Orin, anything else before we say
No,
goodbye?
I think it'd be great to, have you on again, Eric, in the future, and maybe even with a grower
Yeah.
or one of your or a restaurateur chef, so that we can get different perspectives in the same conversation. Could be a lot of fun. But at the very least, we want to stay in touch with you. And I think I met your wife at Barrio Bread on
Yeah.
pizza night. Don and I are working on some fun projects right now. So there's a lot of collaboration happening, and we look forward to doing whatever we can to support you and Pivot Produce. So
Yeah. There's so many cool stories in the food system. I don't think you're going to have any trouble. Fun.
Yeah, it's a time to be optimistic. All right,
Yeah.
Eric, thanks again.
thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Talk soon, man.